Eagles Entertainment.
With the 10th pick in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select...
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, presented by Life Brand. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. We've got a lot to hit on in today's show, but first, we're going to start things off with Scout Stories, where Eagles Director of Player Personnel, Brandon Brown, is going to drop in once again to discuss scouting the linebacker position. What are the traits that matter most, and what are the separating factors that split up the best from the best? We're going to hit on that with Brandon here at the top of the show. After that, we've got Saturday Scouting, where we've got a couple All-Star Game announcements to hit on with Ben Fennell, then also an interesting exercise with the Pro Bowl rosters being announced last week. What are some of the takeaways we can get from a scouting and a team-building standpoint at each of these positions? We'll cover that there, Ben and I, in Saturday Scouting. After that, we've got Draft Mailbag, one mock draft to go through at the end of the show. As always, make sure you jump onto our Apple Podcast page, leave us a rating, leave us a review. Appreciate everybody that has thrown us your support. If you've got a mock draft or rankings, any draft question about a prospect who has announced that he's entering the draft, whatever it is, jump onto our Apple Podcast page, leave us the review right there in the comment box. We will answer it here in an upcoming episode. That said, let's get this going. Excited to start things off here with Brandon Brown in Scout Stories.
Pull up a seat. It's time for Scout Stories.
Well, let's get going here on Scout Stories as I welcome in Eagles Director of Player Personnel, Brandon Brown, to talk about the linebacker spot. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us here on the show.
Fran, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
So let's talk about this position, because so many different body types and skill sets have those two letters put next to them, LB. So especially in today's game, converted safeties, converted edge rushers, guys moving all around to be able to play linebacker. What is it that makes it so hard to be able to evaluate and then project these guys coming from all these different body types?
Yeah, Fran, that's a good question. I think the hardest part, especially with the linebacker position, is it's an ever evolving position body type wise. Where if you look 10 years ago, what was considered the top playing in the NFL may be considered outdated now. And I say that because you've seen maybe guys become smaller, more athletic, more versatile, where the ability to play on 3 downs, be able to execute blitzes, also be able to function in coverage, man coverage on every down, and not just be, a 2-down downhill run defender. The job description has changed. And when I mean the job description has changed is offenses are always looking to create the mismatch. And as you get the, athletic pass catching back, or just the back by committee approach, where you do almost have that back that can function, almost as a pseudo slot receiver, they find that mismatch to, really find the linebacker one-on-one and isolate him. Or, if it's the tight end that becomes isolated on the linebacker one-on-one. And I just think the guy has to be able to run better at the linebacker position, change directions, be explosive, more than in the past, because of how creative offenses are getting in terms of trying to expose that position. So I think, more than anything, I think ability to process is always going to be king, because as offenses get creative, move guys around, if you're a guy that's just, a see ball, get ball guy, but, can't line up, can't direct traffic, can't adjust to shifts and motions and get paralyzed on the snap, you can be a supreme athlete, but you've seen it across the league, guys that are supreme college athletes or players start to short circuit mentally at the NFL level and don't live up to potential. So I think, the guys that have that high level of instincts, and then, the versatility to handle different coverage matchups and have the range to play sideline to sideline, and then be a consistent leverage player in terms of a one-on-one tackling situation, those become those, premier guys or consistent starters in the league that, hey, we can play you on first, second, and third down. We don't have to take you out because we're scared of the matchup that might be presented from the other side.
And to me, like you talked about, just how it's not all about the traits. And I feel like on the outside, a lot of people will look at this as a tools position. What does he run in the 40? What do his shuttle times look like? Look at how he jumps. He jumped out of the gym out in Indianapolis. But, we've seen guys, and you mentioned there are some guys that not only don't make it in the league, but even guys that, came out and were great testers and are saying like, oh, this guy's going to be a great coverage player. They might be started, but they're not even great coverage players when you boil down to things in the NFL. So, being able to be effective at that position, much more than just the athletic skill set. I would ask you, you talked about the importance of that mental processing. What is it that separates the good from the great, the average from the good? Is it that mental aspect of the game for you in your mind?
I think it's the mental aspect. I think it's coverage versatility, and I think it's blitz value.
Mm.
And when I say the mental aspect, I harp on it because, the way offenses can build formations, whether it's, bunch sets, shifts, motions, if you have a linebacker who's gets paralyzed on the snap or is just a step late in terms of reading his keys or false steps, that false step is just as important as what the 40 you're running, because there's the degree of being open from college to the NFL. There's a difference. All you need is that one step. And I just think if you're a guy that can be a problem solver and unwind problems quickly, you may be slower on the clock, but your feet and your eyes are always going to get to where they need to go quickly. And I think what you said, separating the average from the good, when you have that processing ability, but then you have enough speed to match a back and beat him to the corner on an outside run, right? Or you have enough speed to carry a tight end up the seam. So you have enough intellect to handle the responsibility, but then you also have the athletic traits to match, maybe two positions, whether it's a linebacker covering a running back or a tight end or even a slot at times, and not be completely out-athleted at the position. And then also, do you have the versatility to, in third down situations or exotic blitz situations when the defense may be running, 6 or 7 man pressures, do you have the element of ability to, beat a running back one-on-one in protection and create pressure on the quarterback? And I just think that being able to do that separates the average to the good, to the very good, to the excellent, because you're always presenting the element of confusion, right? Mm-hmm. So as an offense, you don't know whether, you may be blitzing, you may be dropping in coverage, because you have the ability to do both. And you make yourself not, lack of, for better terms, you're not a one-dimensional linebacker who can only, move downhill, can't drop in coverage, isn't explosive or slippery enough in one-on-one situations to be an effective blitzer. So I think the more you can do that's in your toolbox, it makes you almost like a versatile chess piece and a problem solver on the defensive side.
And I think for the listeners too, I think it's really important that you note that, whether a guy, one guy might excel in coverage and maybe he's not a great blitzer. One guy might be a great blitzer, doesn't excel in coverage. Both guys have athletic traits. Then it comes down to the scheme and situation and usage, right? In terms of how one team may value him over another.
Correct. And there's guys, you see it all every week in the league where there may be a really good coverage linebacker, but because of, like I said, the nature of some of the players in the linebacker position getting smaller, he may be, 6 foot 220, and he can't hold up between the tackles. So on early downs, you may not see him because he gets swallowed up by a guard in inside run situations, or he can't get off of a fullback who's pulling at him. So in these maybe more obvious percentile passing situations, this guy's really good in matchups. So he may be the fourth linebacker, but he may be the best cover linebacker that comes in and has a role in sub. So, you call it that sub package player that may not play, 60 snaps a game, but he may be on the field for 15 snaps in a niche role. So I just think the evolution of the athlete at the linebacker position allows you to have these niche players who do serve an important part because they do solve a part of the matchup problem.
When you reflect back on year one of Brandon Brown as an evaluator in the NFL and look to where you are now, has there been a learning experience, a piece of advice, basically an evolution of your process and your thought process when it comes to the linebacker spot? Is there something that sticks out to you there?
Yeah, 100%, Fran. I think when you look at the linebacker position, it's ever evolving. Like I said, we're at the NFL level, we can only handle and make decisions based on what we get from at the college side. And I just think as guys are getting bigger, faster, stronger, or more versatile at the college level, it's becoming more versatile in how to scout these guys, right? So it may not always just be the traditional linebacker. You may have the overgrown safety who can now, has all the mental aptitude but has the plus movement skills that he can play well linebacker. So I just think the projection game becomes a little bit more, not say complicated, but it becomes a little bit more intensive of a process where you just don't broad stroke a guy and say, hey, he lined up at linebacker, he's going to be a linebacker in the league. You get situations where It could be a DPR in college, designated pass rusher, who can be a Sam linebacker in the NFL, because you see enough athletic tools there to transition. And this guy can play on 2 feet, and he has all the movement skills. He can create pressure in sub-package situations. Or it's the safety who may be a box safety in the college level, but this guy is a quick processor. Hey, he can end up maybe calling our defense as a Mike, because he's such a high task oriented and quick processor at the safety position. Plus he has maybe, he may be 215, but this guy may be, 6'2" with 33-inch arms, and say, man, he could end up being 230, 235 if we get him in the right nutrition and dietary program. So I just think you can get creative with how you want to skin the cat in terms of placing guys at the linebacker position. So I think it's, I tell my younger self, man, be open-minded, because these guys come in different sizes and shapes, and you never know where you can find the next guy that may not be an every down player, but maybe a very important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, that's the thing is, like, because you mentioned there are some guys that are basically slot corners in college. They were, line them up. They were an overhang player to the field over number 3 or the number 2 receiver. Then you have guys that, they came down, they played dime linebacker. They've got extensive action playing in the box and reading from a stack position. And then there are some guys that, like you said, lined up on the line of scrimmage. And so being able to project all of those guys into your scheme, into your system, it makes it's really fun, but also can be really challenging as well. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us here to shed some light on the linebacker spot. We'll talk to you again soon right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Fran, appreciate you having me, and a pleasure being on the podcast.
Well, great stuff there from Brandon Brown, and loved what he said about how the job requirements constantly changing there at the linebacker position as the league evolves. I mean, to me, when you look at the positions that have so much run-pass responsibility, we talk about that with like tight end as well, safety as well. That position, those are the positions that are impacted most. I think that we talked about this a little bit last week with Justice Mosqueda and the defensive line conversation. Hey, with teams starting to move more towards some of these too high looks, what does that mean for defensive linemen? Well, what does that mean for linebackers, right? And Brandon talked about how these guys have to cover linebackers, and you also need those guys to be able to defeat blocks in these light boxes, right? To be able to get to the football. If you're going to play a man down in the box, well, you can't just trade 1 for 1, or else the offense is going to win in the run game every single play, right? So you need these linebackers to be able to defeat blocks. They can't just go 1 for 1. And I think it's a really interesting conversation around the linebacker position. I love what Brandon said there. Ability to process information will always be king. Really good stuff about the need for instincts at that position, and also the versatility aspect, right? That ability to do more for a defense. And that has been one of the more consistent themes in this segment throughout the course of the season, right? The more you can do. How often have you heard Brandon Brown and Anthony Patch and Ian Cunningham, Alan Walking, everybody hitting on the more you can do each and every week here on the show? I think that's been really, really interesting. And then the evolution of the process, just thinking outside the box, is not a cookie cutter template. And I will tell you, we'll hit on that theme a little bit later, actually right now in this segment with Ben Fennell. It's time for Saturday Scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, time to keep the show rolling here with Ben Fennell as we get into Saturday Scouting. And Ben, before we get into this Pro Bowl discussion, I want to first talk about a couple of acceptances along the defensive line for the Senior Bowl over the weekend. And we'll start with San Diego State pass rusher Cam Thomas. This is the guy that you've been talking about on the show for at least a year. I might be going back to his freshman year. Ben, this guy's really interesting. I've had a chance to study him lately. I'll let you wax poetic first, though, because you've been talking about Cam Thomas for a couple of years.
Well, he's a redshirt junior, and his 3 years on the field for the San Diego State Aztecs have been productive, and more productive. He's over 150 QB pressures in his 3 years, and has really been stacking those years and getting better each season, capping off this year with an incredible 12-sack season, 77 pressures. But he's a guy that dominated as a redshirt freshman, wearing that ugly number 65. He's now wearing 99, much more appropriate. But I think he was on these all freshman teams all over college football in 2019. And he's just playing out there in that lonely Mountain West at 10 and 12 o'clock at night for us East Coasters, and hasn't gotten a lot of attention. And that's kind of been a little bit of a unsung passion of mine, is kind of give some attention to those late night guys and West Coast prospects that seemingly don't get the buzz they deserve. He kind of dominated the same way Aiden Hutchinson did for the Michigan Wolverines. That's what he looks like. He's tall, he's long, he's strong, he's versatile. He's a guy I think I've compared to Kyle Vanden Bosch for a little bit of a throwback. kind of a brute strong edge rusher that wins with a lot of power, good run pass defender, but a productive player that's been on the field producing, for 3 years, just doesn't get a lot of attention out there.
And for what it's worth, like I've studied him over the weekend, and this was the first time I've done a deep dive on him. I did 3 games from this year. He's played some Power 5 teams. They played Arizona and Utah this year, obviously playing in the Mountain West. They'll go up against some really interesting offensive schemes rather. And, watching him at 6'5", 270, they play him up and down the line of scrimmage. I think he's got a solid rush plan. I think he understands what he's doing. And it's no accident that this guy's always around the football. I mean, you mentioned some of the numbers, not just 20 sacks over his career, 38 quarterback hits in 3 seasons, 94 QB hurries in 3 seasons. I mean, those are extraordinary numbers for a pass rusher. And I'm going to be honest, I kind of went back and forth going, is he more of an interior guy? Is he going to be an edge guy? I think he's going to do a little bit of both in the NFL. And the more I watched, the more I thought this guy really reminds me of Max Crosby, and not just like Max Crosby coming out of Eastern Michigan, like more like Max Crosby, Pro Bowl edge rusher here in the NFL this year. And I feel pretty comfortable kind of viewing Cameron Thomas as in that next bucket, that next tier after those top tier pass rushers. When you get into the Thibodeaus and the Hutchinsons and the Karlaftis, like when you get past that group, I feel pretty comfortable figuring Cameron Thomas to be in that next little bunch there. And I know Dane Brugler had him on the back end of round 1 in his last mock draft. I don't argue with that assessment. I think he can be right in that area when it's all said and done for this draft. He's a good player, really well-rounded player.
Yeah, and Fran, I just think he really embodies the traits, the skill set, the style, and the combination of all those of very productive players in the NFL. So what do I mean by that? A guy that plays every down. So he's a good run defender. So he plays on first and second downs, no problem. That allows you to get more play time, make more production. He's a power player. He doesn't really look to run around guys. Yes, he has some nice swim moves and some ways to squeeze into gaps, but he has no problem playing off contact and through contact, which we see more and more in the NFL. It's the guys that can handle contact from their opponents, stay balanced, stay in the play, stay active. Those are the ones that produce. And I know we get excited about the high side edge rushers and the good first step and the bendy guys. They don't produce as much in the NFL anymore. And it's the guys that can win with power, inside moves, be a good run defender, and get themselves on the field. Those are the guys producing all over the NFL. And Cam Thomas just quietly checks all the boxes of those types of players.
Yeah, I mean, he plays with relentless pursuit of the football. I love that. And that's a trait that is shared by a lot of the top pass rushers in the NFL. I love his play personality. And he can win in a number of different ways. You mentioned that, that swim move, and he uses it especially inside, like to win inside. That is his go-to low side rush move. But he's got really fast hands. And so while there are times where he gets stuck at the top of the rush, I think he's guilty of playing a little bit too high off the ball at times. That's what gets him into trouble a little bit. But outside of that, I mean, this guy can win in a number of different ways. I really liked Cameron Thomas. I think this kid's going to be
really
a good
quick,
player.
Fran, just like before we put him to bed, last year, 1 and 2 in sacks in the NFL, edge rushers, TJ Watt, Trey Hendrickson.
Sure.
I'm going to ask you really quick. Both had about 15 sacks. How many of those sacks were under 3 seconds? Do you know off the top of your head?
No, I don't know off the top of my head. You and I did that study of those guys on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast last spring, though.
The long story short, who cares? Those guys win with effort, with motor, with relentlessness, and those are the ones that produce, and you get your sacks and they fit into your stats and you propose them to your agent and your team in the offseason. Nobody says, whoa, wait a minute, TJ. Half of those are kind of cleanup sacks, wouldn't you say? A quarter were coverage sacks, the quarterback got outside the pocket extending. Nobody cares about that. Go get the quarterback. Go play with your hair on fire. Be relentless. Play with that motor. Play with good effort, and you fall into production. And that's going to be Cam Thomas. I promise you. Cam Thomas is going to be a good pro.
Yeah, Jurassic Park, Dennis Nedry throwback. Nobody cares. That's the way we talk about how Cam Thomas wins. Another defensive lineman going to the Senior Bowl, Neil Farrell from LSU, previously announced for the Shrine Bowl, now announced over the weekend on Sunday morning for the Senior Bowl. I've done a little bit of bio work on Neil Farrell. I haven't done a deep dive on his film yet. I was looking forward to doing that in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be doing so. But interested to kind of get your thoughts on Neil Farrell from LSU. He's only a one-year starter coming into the season, so now that's on a tape before 2021. Interested to kind of get your thoughts on what he brings to the league.
Yeah, he's an interesting player in that he's been on the field for LSU for a number of years, particularly even in that 2019 championship season where he had 3 starts and appeared in every game. He's got good size at 6'4", about 320, but he's not really this fat guy run plugger. He's got a good first step. He can upfield penetrate, gets a lot of knockbacks, and gets a lot of plays on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage. Will also hustle and flow laterally outside the tackle box to make plays with really good energy. He's just a guy evaluating these LSU defenders has been up and down and around, the charts with that dominant 2019 season, all over the place last year, and slowly came back to form this year. He's a really interesting run pass defender with good size. He's experienced. I think he's already 23 years old, if I'm not mistaken, as well. He just had a birthday in September there. But he's played some good football for a championship team in the SEC for 3 years. That should intrigue scouts right off the cuff there. So let's see what he can provide down in Mobile.
Yeah, I got certainly to watch here moving forward. We've talked about how great this edge group is in this class. That interior defensive line class, I think, is better than last year's group for sure. And I think he's going to be a big part of that. Let's now get into this discussion I think is interesting to have. And that's talking about the Pro Bowl. And I want to preface this with this thought. And I'm pretty sure, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm pretty sure you feel the same way. I hate, maybe hate's a strong word, I despise all of the discourse and the debate and everything going around, like Pro Bowl selection, Pro Bowl snubs, who should be in, who should be out. Some people love that stuff. That's just not like the content for me. That's not the discussion for me. I can't stand it. But that said, what can we take from the Pro Bowl starters announcements and seeing who made it and all that? To me, this is a selection of players that somebody has deemed to be good, right? Or amongst the best in the NFL. And it's a conglomeration of fan vote, player vote, team vote, right? So this is a collection of players that we can deem to be amongst the best in the NFL. So if we take this sample, what are some observations that we can glean? What are some traits that show up time and time again? It's some of our biggest takeaways. And we don't need to spend too much time on every position, but I thought we'd kind of buzz through and say, all right, well, what are some of our big takeaways? And I guess we could start at quarterback, where it's kind of a who's who, some of the best young players in the league, along with some of the guys we've seen there time and time again. At quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Kyler Murray for the NFC, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson over on the AFC. Interested to kind of get your thoughts. Is there anything that stands out when you look at this group of this 6 quarterbacks heading to the Pro Bowl?
Well, I think it's really important, particularly in quarterback, is to take the snapshot of the era. And what I mean by that is look at 20 years ago at the Pro Bowl quarterbacks, because you had Brady, you had Manning, you had Phillip Rivers, you had Drew Brees. You had a lot of standing statue pocket passing quarterbacks. Outside of Tom Brady, the 5 on this list are incredibly mobile. And I know you may be saying that, is Justin Herbert mobile? Yeah, I mean, they ran quarterback power with him at Oregon. I distinctly remember him taking a 50-yard touchdown against Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl. He's a guy who can move around quite a bit. He has that mix of being able to play in the pocket and out of structure, which is the same thing with Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray. And Aaron Rodgers has slowly settled back into being a more structured quarterback as he's hitting the twilight of his career and playing in an incredibly balanced offense. But we obviously know Aaron Rodgers was successful for a number of years using his legs and being mobile. I think it's just incredible what Tom Brady does as well, sitting on that list there. But stylistically, trend-wise, I think mobility is kind of the magic these days. You have to be able to play within structure, but also have that ability to get out of trouble, because we know things will break down.
I think that's the big point. I think when you're talking, and this is a big picture discussion about quarterback, is that ability to play outside of structure is big, but you still need to be able to make the layups, execute inside of structure. And that's what we've seen from a lot of the quarterbacks on this list. And to me, I agree. It's the big takeaway. You look at Tom Brady, obviously he's kind of the unicorn of that group. And obviously he's at a certain stage of his career compared to the rest of them.
And I think projecting this forward and how we evaluate quarterbacks moving forward, it's also a trend among Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Aaron Rodgers for their unique arm angles and unique arm platforms and throwing off platform. But it is incredibly important to remember, you don't rely on improvisation as a primary skill set to execute the play. It's a secondary skill set when you need it. Same thing with arm angles. You don't just throw sidearm for the willingness of throwing sidearm. You throw sidearm and off platform when you need to. So don't ever see a quarterback when he does that and think he has to do that primary. That's a secondary skill set. And that's where, guys like Aaron Rodgers and even Mahomes a little bit this year got themselves in trouble with relying on improvisation, relying on unique arm angles. You only go to those skill sets when you need them, and you're going to need them. So it's important to have that ability, but don't make it a primary objective and a primary skill set in getting the job done.
I love it. Well, let's get over to the running back position. And 6 names here, three AFC, 3 NFC. Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, 3 very talented backs over in the AFC. Dalvin Cook, James Conner, Alvin Kamara with the NFC. I will say one thing that really quickly stands out, Ben. 5 of those 6 guys, second round. Seems to be the sweet spot there for acquiring running backs that are going to be able to hit that level. You don't necessarily need to spend them in the first, and we know that those guys are typically few and far between anyway. But those second round running backs have been kind of a sweet spot for teams.
I love that our brains kind of just ebb and flow on different frequencies, because you're probably thinking second round. I'm looking at these guys and saying 220, 220,
Yeah, I know that's another aspect too. Yep.
5 out of the 6 outside of Kamara, who, for all intents and purposes, Kamara isn't a small guy, but he's not a big guy either. He's right in that 205, 210 range that he can kind of do both. But we see a lot of backs nowadays. Hey, if you can't contribute in the pass game, you can't be a satellite back, you really can't play. That's not the case. You need the body armor to survive in this league. It is tough to be running back. You want to talk about short shelf lives? Have it be a running back without the body armor. You're going to be a really short shelf life. You got to be able to take the blow of the NFL schedule. And that's practice. It's during the week. And then just executing the games between the tackles. And then spinning this forward to this year, it's a great group of 225-pound backs in this class. Isaiah Spiller, Hassan Haskins, Chris Rodriguez, Charbonnet. Master Teague is a heavy back. Brian Robinson. If these guys run 4.6, 4.55, don't put them down your board. There's a skill set for them. And I think we're watching a very interesting running back in our own backfield, and Jordan Howard be very successful as well. I know he's not on this Pro Bowl list, but I think it's just really interesting kind of evaluating this landscape of running backs in this pass game world of the NFL.
Yeah, I think it is interesting when you look at just what is required to be able to be that 3-down ball carrier in the NFL. It's not just the be able to catch the football. That was a question for a bunch of these guys, right? Hey, what can Jonathan Taylor provide in the pass game? What can Nick Chubb provide in the pass game? Well, they weren't used that way in college. Again, we sound like a broken record when we say this about the running back position in particular, does not mean that they can't do it when they move to the NFL. Let's go over to wide receiver, a bunch of names here. And obviously, look, this is one of the first positions where there's going to be a bunch of different body types and skill sets. But you look at Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, and Deebo Samuel. I would say the large majority of these guys, number one, are really strong route runners. You look at Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, some of the best route runners in the NFL right now. Tyreek Hill he can run right by you, but he will snap off a break like nobody's business as well, right? So I think that's one big one. But I'll tell you one other thing, Ben. All of these guys, they are 3-level threats. They have the ability to beat you at all 3 levels vertically, quick game, yards after catch, screen game, right? But then also that ability, and this goes with the route running aspect, that ability to win at the intermediate area. Hey, can you run a deep dig? Can you run a comeback and get 2, 3, 4 yards of separation at the top of the route? But when I look at these guys, that ability to impact all 3 levels of the field, I think that's an element of playing the receiver position that kind of sets guys apart from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the 3-level aspect is really interesting because they all have the speed to win vertically, the nuance to win in the middle and quick game, and then that kind of dog mentality and creativeness with the ball in their hands. And that's where you get the screens and the quick game concepts just to get the ball in their hands. Another thing, and I know people may be a little recency bias here with Chase and Hill and some of the issues they've had this year. They're all very, very secure, reliable pass catchers. These guys typically don't go through the dropsies every now and then. Yes, Tyreek Hill has had a couple this year. Jamar Chase, he had his well-documented kind of issue in camp and a couple drops this year. He's a young guy. He'll figure it out. Tyreek Hill's proven enough. But the rest of these guys, and Diggs and Adam and Deebo, these guys have no problem catching that ball, plucking it without thinking, tucking it away, and getting up the field. These guys are not guys that fight the ball or have unnatural hands or maybe really loose athletes or track stars that had to convert to receiver. And typically those guys, You start to see the unnaturalness in the hands once that competition gets heightened. So these guys are all excellent pass catchers, which sounds basic, but there are so many guys we're trying to convert now to pass catchers, whether you're the big giraffe tight end, or the the undersized tackle that they want to be a mismatch guy, or the track star I just mentioned. All those guys typically don't show up to the NFL with very natural hands. So these guys catch the ball first and foremost.
And then what's something we've talked about for a couple of years here on the show is that ability to play through contact. You talked about it earlier with defensive linemen. I feel the same way about wide receivers. You have to be able to deal with contact at all three levels. To bring it back to my original point, you've got to be able to deal with it early in the down, beating press, mid-route, fighting through contact as you're working through your route, and then at the catch point, that ability to win it at all three phases, and certainly after the catch as well, right? That's a big part of it. But when you look at Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel and Justin Jefferson and Keenan Allen, right? They'll run Keenan Allen out of the backfield at times, running like Texas routes. Like, you have to be able to deal with contact at that position and be able to play through it at a high level. To me, that's one theme that stands out from that group. Let's look at tight end here. Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce of the AFC, George Kittle, Kyle Pitts over at the NFC. Obviously, you've got some dynamic athletes there in Kelce and Pitts, guys that have been used more as wide receivers. Mark Andrews, you would put in that as well. He's not necessarily always that inline guy, whereas that is George Kittle, right? He is that dominant point of attack force while also being able to be that pass catch threat as well.
Yeah, but I think it's important to not just say, are they a flex guy or an inline guy? These guys can all play around the formation. And I think using that versatile skill set, and they all have the ability to play with their hand in the turf. They all have the ability to be a wing player. They all have the ability to play in the slot. And I think each of their kind of coordinators, whether it's Andy or Kyle Shanahan or Roman out in Baltimore, Mark Andrews, X, Y, and Z. But I think these guys' ability to play all over the formation allows them to win in different ways and tap into their skill set in different ways. Because if you're just a one-trick pony, it's real easy to stop that trick or to take away that trick. So these guys all have different ways to win. Now, they're all different players, different skill set guys, but they show up on Sundays with a bag of tricks and a list of ways to win and be productive.
I'm going to be honest, that's been one of my big takeaways in talking with members of the Eagles personnel staff over the course of this season. What's one consistent theme that comes up in scout stories every single week, regardless of what position we are talking about? We get back to that old adage of the more you can do and the versatility and how that sets you apart. So it's the more ways that you can win, that's going to, it's great to have a special trait in a very specialized way that you win. Hey, if you're a speed threat at wide receiver, if you're a pure high side edge rusher, if you're a pure run stuffing nose tackle, right? Like, that's great. Like, there are roles for those kinds of players, but if you want to try and see who are the guys that have that ability to be the best of the best, one of the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 best players at your position in the NFL, the more you can do, that allows you to be on the field more. That allows you to be productive. And so I think that goes a long, long way.
Do you feel the tight end position embodies that more than others, in that, yes, there's guys like these 4 that provide very versatile skill sets? A lot of tight ends that are also one-trick ponies and have the specialized skill set, whether you're, for example, the pseudo extra tackle like a Lee Smith. Hey, we know Lee Smith ain't stretching anybody vertically. We know he's probably not even catching the ball out there, but we know he's going to be an excellent run blocker, almost to the level of a extra tackle. And there's a lot of athletic tight ends where they only get their number called on third downs and play out in space. So do you feel like that tight end spot's a little bit of a everything, and is there still a place for those specialized sets?
Yeah, I think there are, and I think it's the positions that are typically close to the football that are going to be viewed as 3-down-ish positions, right? So if you're talking tight end, defensive line, linebacker, you want guys that, certainly having that 3-down player that's great, that's ideal. But you don't necessarily need to have that guy. And if you have guys that have that complementary skill set, you think back to, when the Eagles won the Super Bowl in 2017 and that tight end room, right? You had Brent Selleck, Zach Ertz, and Trey Burton. All those guys could be used interchangeably, but all of them offered specific traits and different ways they were used that allowed them to be really effective, right? So, is that different than someone that's going to play 87% of the snaps and be that every down guy? Yeah, but you can still find ways. It's going to be up to the team and up to the coach and up to the scheme to be able to leverage all of those different skill sets.
And what if you're watching one of those one-dimensional guys in college? You think it's easier to make the good run blocker a pass game weapon, Or is it easier to make that pass game weapon a efficient blocker out there?
I think that's going to come down to an individual stuff, right? So whether it's, we've seen Dallas Goddard, where he was the focal point of the South Dakota State offense, right? And he was a pure receiver. Well, what is he as a blocker? We don't really know. He wasn't really asked to stay in pass protection. He wasn't really asked to be a point of attack player, but this guy's 6'5", 255, 260 pounds, and he's tough. You see that with the ball in his hands. The guy's tough. Let's work him out. Let's just see what he's what he's like, how he's wired. The coaches here in Philadelphia felt pretty good about this guy projecting as a blocker. And we saw it year one as a rookie in 2018. Wow, this guy's one of the better blockers pretty quickly in the NFC. And now you see he's one of the best 3-down tight ends in the NFL, and honestly should be on this list. But like I said, I don't want to get down that path, Ben.
Yeah, I think it's so important with the tight ends and the pass game, run game abilities is putting these guys in positions to be successful. And that's what I think of right away when I think about tight end blocking is, are you putting them in a position to even win before you start it? And there's a lot of assignments out there where they're doomed from the start. And there's some teams that give them great advantageous situations, whether it's angles or leverages to get your assignment done. So one step further, that is how they're used and what they're being asked to do.
Yep, no question. Hey, look, Mark Andrews, can he put his hand in the dirt and go get a linebacker at times? Absolutely. But when he and Nick Boyle are both healthy, you bet that they're going to use them differently in the run game. Right? When that offense is humming, what Nick Boyle is doing in that offense is different than what Mark Andrews is doing. And when Nick Boyle got all that money, people are like, oh, why'd you pay that? This guy's a valuable piece in that offense.
Well, one step further with this, what about the young scouts out there that say, I missed on Mark Andrews? He played out in the slot all day long at Oklahoma. I didn't see him as a 3rd-round pick, and I certainly didn't see him as a 3,000-yard tight end in his 4 years in the NFL, almost 30 touchdowns. What do you say about the Goddards and the Andrews where people didn't see that projection?
Well, that's the part of it. And what do we always say? You have to understand the limitations of the tape, right? And that what was it that gave those teams, the Eagles and the Ravens, faith in those players was, hey, they sat down, they had an understanding of how they were wired and what threshold of toughness they were able to reach, right? And so if you understand that Dallas Goddard can grow, we have a lot of faith that he can grow into a blocker. Hey, we have a lot of faith that this running back can learn how to catch the football. He wasn't asked to do it, but we had him in the individual workout. We saw him at his pro day, and he caught the ball pretty smooth. Like, coach, I don't know. They didn't ask me to run.
You have to leave a window of potential to change and develop and to get better. And, as much as I say, what about scouts that missed on him? I mean, Mark Andrews was a 3rd-round pick. Travis Kelce was a 3rd-round pick. George Kittle was a 5th-round pick. That means every team in the league passed on them multiple times. Yep. So, you live and you learn.
All right, let's get to the offensive line. We'll start at offensive tackle. 6 names here. Rashawn Slater, a rookie 1st-round pick, making the list here for the LA Chargers. Orlando Brown with the Chiefs. Dion Dawkins with the Bills. And then over in the NFC, loaded group here. Trent Williams, Tristan Wirfs, and then the guy that's always on this list whenever healthy, Tyron Smith from the Dallas Cowboys. I see a bunch of 1st-round picks here, Ben. Tyron Smith, Wirfs, Williams, Slater, all top 15 selections. Orlando Brown, he went round 3, I believe, after he was a historically bad tester at Oklahoma at the Combine. And then Dion Dawkins coming from Temple. He came from a little bit of a smaller school, but was a good player. But for the most part, these guys, the blue chip, they were high 1st-round picks.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting in that they're all types of shapes and sizes. Yes, Orlando Brown Jr., 3rd-round pick as well. But in the AFC, 3 guys that do not fit the prototypical mold.
No,
Rashawn Slater, Dion Dawkins, and Orlando Brown. Slater and Dawkins being the undersized 6'3", lacking length, and Orlando Brown going the other end of the spectrum, being a behemoth at 6'8", 350. Neither that prototypical size you really wanted at the spot there, but effective and efficient when they're technically sound and used in the right offenses. Those NFC guys, a little bit more prototypical with Trent Williams, Tristan Wirfs, and Tyron Smith. I got to say, Tristan Wirfs, that's a cushy situation out there in Tampa Bay to play and protect for Tom Brady, because that guy is not holding the ball. He's not drifting in the pocket. He's not looking to extend any plays. He's getting that thing out on time and in that little 2x2 box right behind the center guard. So all you got to do is protect inside out for 2.5 seconds, and you should have a pretty clean game out there. But Tristan Wirfs has been a really impressive pro so far. Nice to see some young guys in there with second-year guy Wirfs and first-year player Rashawn Slater.
Yeah, no doubt. And there are a bunch of other names that could be in this discussion, but I think it's an interesting sample to be able to pull from. And I think it's interesting, too, when we get to the interior guys, a bunch of names here, obviously, between guard and center. Quentin Nelson, Joel Bitonio, Wyatt Teller, Corey Linsley, and Ryan Kelly with the AFC. And then in the NFC, Zach Martin, Brandon Scherf, Ali Marpet, Jason Kelsey, and Ryan Jensen. Kind of a mix here between the blue chip, hey, top half of round one, Brandon Scherf, top 10 pick, Quentin Nelson, top 10 pick, Zach Martin, top 15 pick. And then you get into the day 3 range and late day 3, right, where you got Jason Kelsey and Corey Linsley, Wyatt Teller, those guys all kind of Ryan Jensen late in the draft, if they've drafted at all.
Yeah, really interesting kind of mix there. I'm just trying to assess the landscape here and see if there's any particular trends or anything. A lot of really smart players in there. Guys that have the athleticism to play out in space as well. So many pullers and guys that do so well in the screen game and getting up to the second level. And some brute strong refrigerators with Quentin Nelson and Wyatt Teller and that type of guard as well. So, yeah, a lot of shapes and sizes on here. Interesting mix of a lot of white guys on here as well. I'm not sure if the interior O-lineman trend is there.
To me, like I look at the elites of the elite, and we've talked about this before, is like the Quentin Nelsons, the Brandon Scherfs, when Brandon Brooks is healthy, Zach Martin, obviously. When you get into that guard spot, it goes back to one of the things we're talking about, the more ways you can win, the better. And these are guys that can win with athleticism, technique, toughness, strength, power, right? Like I'll literally check all the boxes for these guys. And I remember when Wyatt Teller was coming out of Virginia Tech and it was, wow, this guy is a converted defensive lineman. Like he comes over, he's only been a 2-year player on the offensive side, but man, this guy, like, look at him as a puller. Look at the ferocity on contact. Like he needs to get a little bit stronger, but man, like look at how he gets after people. And so you start to say like, all right, well, he checks a couple of these boxes. And then you get over to like Ryan Jensen. You're like, man, like, this guy is tough as nails. He's really strong. And look, is he the most fleet of foot? No, like no one's going to mistake him for Jason Kelsey. But yeah, he checks a lot of these boxes. Ryan Kelly, is he dominant in any one area? Like I don't know if he's dominant. Man, like the kid's pretty athletic. He's strong. He never gives up room in the pocket against bull rushers. He gets movement at the point of attack in the run game. He's tough. He's technically sound. Like, yeah, this guy's a good player. And that's what I feel like gets lost when we talk about centers, especially center, but centers and guards in particular is like, it's not necessarily about how great your best trait is. It's about like how weak is your weakest trait, right? Like how weak of those key traits that we talked about, do you have a huge hole in your game? Because if you do, teams are going to find that out. You're going to get attacked with that. But if you don't, if you check boxes, well, you could be a starter in the NFL and you could be a good starter.
Yeah, and I think 2 other trends really fast to this group: competitive group, nasty group for the most part, finishing group, borderline dirty group, with right. Guys like Nelson and Scherf and Ryan Jensen will wear that badge with honor. He has no problem being called
that's a compliment, right?
Dirty out there. The other thing, Fran, which I've been talking with a defensive line coach for a couple of weeks now about this and putting more emphasis on it. And I said, yes, I said defensive line. He puts so much emphasis on getting off the ball. He says he spends almost half his time in practices getting off the ball. Because if we don't get off the ball, we lost before the play even started. That means we're a half step down or we're late before the play even started. So the group here of these 8 or 10 offensive linemen, these guys all get off the ball exceptionally quick. And I don't think that's really harped enough in the NFL. The guys on both sides are really good. Everybody's strong. Everybody's quick. What can separate you, just a little bit? Flying off the ball then puts you a half step ahead, leverage ahead, body ahead to execute your assignment, and then go to hand-to-hand combat and try to move guys and execute the play. All of these guys get off the ball exceptionally well, and that gives them one extra smidge of a second or a smidge of a blade of grass and to get their jobs done. So anytime you're watching these college kids this year, especially guards and center, watch how they get off the ball in concert with that ball being snapped.
I'm reminded of 2 podcast interviews when you said that, when you talk about play speed off the ball. First was one I did with a person we all respected, Brandon Thorne, right, talking about offensive line play. And I remember being at O-Line Masterminds, having him on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast and asking, what's the most important athletic trait for an offensive lineman? And he talked about that play speed, that ability to get out of your stance. And if you can't get from A to B, you're going to get beat, right? And so to me, like to your point, I think that's there. And then another one is I heard Howard Mudd on, and may rest in peace, one of the best offensive line coaches in NFL history, Howard Mudd on Daniel Jeremiah's podcast on Move the Sticks. This is a few years back, and talking about the rhythm of a block. And in pass blocking, you start fast, slow down for the point of contact, and then you move your feet to finish. And it's fast, slow, fast, but emphasis on that fast part. And you think about some of the offensive linemen that Howard Mudd coached over the course of his career, certainly with the Colts, but obviously here in Philadelphia here as well in the 2 years that he was with the Eagles. But that play speed, so important. He was the guy who targeted and started Jason Kelce from day one as a 6th round pick. I think that matches.
When you say, Fran, when you say fast, slow, fast, I just think about like a giant weight moving around like a ship. Like these guys are 300 pounds. It's not easy to go fast, slow, fast. And that's what we talk about, body control.
And governing your speed, right? That's that quote. That's the quote from the other Paul Alexander, who does a great job on Twitter. He will always talk about, and he said that on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast as well, is that's a separating factor with pass protectors, is like the guys that have full control of their speed changing throughout their pass set.
And that's something I saw with Rashawn Slater so early. His start-stop, his ability to get fast, slow down, be fast again. There's a lot of 310-pounders that can be fast and then lose control of themselves and get sloppy and can't slow down. And you see guys off balance and losing momentum and things like that. You can't just, be mobile in one area. The fast, slow, fast is a really good perspective of body control. And when you're 320 pounds, that body gets a little harder to control out there. So all these guys, quick off the ball, great body control, competitive edge, versatile ways to win. So really interesting group here at 10 offensive linemen. You're
talking about guys that just are fast, but can't stop. My head went to D2 Mighty Ducks, Luis Mendoza. The guy just can't stop. Let's go to the defensive side. Go defensive line now and edge rushers. And it gets a little sloppy when you're talking about this with the Pro Bowl voting, because they're still doing outside linebackers as edge rushers, and some guys are DNs. So there's a ton of these guys. Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, Trey Hendrickson, TJ Watt, Joey Bosa, Matt Judon, all with the AFC. Nick Bosa, Brian Burns, Cam Jordan, Chandler Jones, Robert Quinn, Shaq Barrett, all with the NFC. And so there's a lot of names, a lot of takeaways. There are guys that were day one picks. There are guys that were mid-round picks. There are guys that primarily win high side. There are guys that win combo. To me, I think that there's one thing that stands out. These are guys that have a go-to move and the ability to complement that go-to move. And then there's that relentless pursuit of the football, I think is pretty universal amongst all these guys, guys that are QB hunters.
Did you split these up, or is there now an edge classification?
No, this is all me, because if we didn't do this, we would have been talking about comparing Darius Leonard to TJ Watt, and I wasn't about to have that.
I remember the outside linebackers always mixed in with the off-ball backers.
Yeah, that's why the Pro Bowl discourse, I can't get in.
I saw the edge list. It was like, okay, we're modernizing.
No, we're not evolving, Ben. We're not evolving.
All right, not quite, but yeah, a lot of interesting body types here. You have guys that are pushing 270 like Cam Jordan. And then guys that are 225, 230, like, Brian Burns is out there. So you can win in all different ways. All these guys are very competitive, but like you had said, multiple ways to win, I think, is the name of the game. Most of these guys are pretty good run defenders as well, too. So like I put a lot of emphasis on play time. If you can't play the run, you're then cutting your ability to have play time and earn production. And like I always kind of say tongue in cheek, yeah, teams are allowed to throw it on first down too, but in order to get those first down sacks, you got to be a first down player and be able to play the run. So see a lot of good run defenders on here, whether it's Myles Garrett, Trey Hendrickson, TJ Watt, Joey Bosa. Nick Bosa is obviously a really good run defender too. And then I'll never forget, Fran, the way we were both sitting there, O-line masterminds, I think 2 or 3 summers ago.
Chandler Jones.
And the way the offensive line room across the league said Chandler Jones is a unicorn. The way they talked about the uniqueness of his pass rush plan, his length, the way he overwhelms you, and the way he strings multiple moves together. I just sat up in my chair and just kind of was in awe of the way the room talked about him and how they had so much respect for him. And when you see a guy lead the NFL in sacks, and then I don't think he played last year and kind of went off the radar, and getting right back to it this year. He's a really, really impressive player.
What do you have, like 4 sacks in week 1, right, when he came back this year? I think when you look at a lot of these guys, and look, guys are going to change the way that they win. When you go player by player by player, not all these guys are going to win the same way. But going back to that point that I made at the top is understanding who you are from a body type standpoint. We learned that at O-line Masterminds as well, right? Is that the way that Teron Armstead wins is not the way that Rashawn Slater is going to win, right? Guys are built differently with different skill sets. So the way that Myles Garrett rushes the passer is not going to be the way that Shaquille Barrett rushes the passer. That's just not the way that it works. But understanding how you win and then complementing off of that, finding different ways to do that. That's something that Chandler Jones has done at a really, really high level. That's something that that Max Crosby has gotten better at every single year studying him on film. The Bosa's are really, I mean, coming out of Ohio State, you saw that they had that really well-developed pass rush plan. And to me, that's when I talk about rush plan, like I kind of use that as a nebulous term, and I'm guilty of that. And I need to get into more why that I value that so much and what that looks like, what that means. But to me, you can kind of summarize it as having an understanding of what your strengths are and how to lean into those strengths and how the opponent is trying to stop those strengths and then how you negate that, right? And so it's just that constant chess match back and forth between these guys.
And for the young scouts out there, there's a lot of top 5 picks on here. Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa, obviously the freak show, Myles Garrett was number 1 overall. But what do you need to see, Fran, in guys like Max Crosby at Eastern Michigan and Trey Hendrickson at FAU or Matt Judon at Grand Valley State, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, and Shaq Barrett coming out of Colorado State.
Colorado State. What do you need to see from those guys against, for all, intents and purposes, lesser competition to then say, wait a minute, they could do that in the NFL on Sundays? What about any of those 4 there? Can you maybe see to project?
What did we talk about? What was the term I used with the San Diego State kid earlier? Relentless pursuit of the football. Like that, to me, like that's something that translates. Trey Hendrickson played nonstop motor, Energizer Bunny level of football when he was at FAU. The guy never stopped going. He never stopped coming. And I think that that's something that carries over. We watched him this spring when he was one of the leaders in sacks last year for the Saints. And the guy just never stopped. So all of his sacks were high-level competitive sacks. It was because he was constantly chasing the football. You want to call them cleanup sacks or hustle sacks, whatever, that's fine. But the guy's getting to the football and producing. And what is he doing now with the Cincinnati Bengals? He's producing with the same exact way. So to me, like that is absolutely a trait that carries. That is a trait that sticks with guys from college to the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a packet here of a buddy I always mentioned to you that interviewed for a GM job about 10 years ago. And one of his defensive line traits are a lot of sacks in the NFL are done with effort and toughness, not always speed and skill. And that was about 10 or 12 years ago. And I've never let that kind of get out of my head because effort, motor, relentlessness can get you a lot of production in this league.
All right, let's get to defensive tackle. And I think a lot of these things will carry over to this group, but 6 guys that were hit on here: DeForest Buckner, Chris Jones, Cam Hayward. It's a really good group. Aaron Donald, Jonathan Allen, and Kenny Clark. All these guys really good run defenders, like really, really strong run defenders, but then also that ability to, obviously, like Aaron Donald is a unicorn generational talent as a pass rusher, but that ability to push the pocket as well with Chris Jones and DeForest Buckner in particular.
Yeah, and I think this group of 6 all have the ability to play with leverage, play stout, and then to take the chair away from you and lay guys and get up the field. I feel like they all have that kind of cat and mouse ability, which we all want to be able to win with power and win with speed. That's the cat and mouse of saying, I'm going to hold you up. I'm going to hold you up. And just when that offensive lineman is ready to hold you up, you swim move them. And every one of these guys has that ability. And I think of Buckner and Jones and Kenny Clark and Aaron Donald, all of those guys have patented plays of being stout across the line of scrimmage, and they all have the ability to win upfield too. So I think having that mix is really important. And Cam Hayward, rough game yesterday, facing the Kansas City Chiefs, been a rough season with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Watch 97 on the Pittsburgh Steelers. This guy plays his butt off all game long. Whether it was getting run on the Minnesota Vikings 2 weeks ago, he was hustling. Yesterday, hustling against the Chiefs in a multiple score game in the second half. All of these guys play incredibly hard as well. But Cam Hayward, tough year, really good player.
I like that. And real quick, I mean, for me, the interior defensive lineman, a lot of those same traits that I talk about with interior offensive line, what is that separates Quentin Nelson and Zach Martin and Brandon Sheriff and Brandon Brooks. I think when you're looking at Buckner and Donald and Chris Jones and all those guys, it's the ability to check the boxes. So Could they win with power? Check. Win with quickness? Check. Technique? Check. Effort? Check, right? Like check all these boxes. All of a sudden you got a great player. That's why we love Deron Payne coming out of Alabama. That's why he's so disruptive, right? He's talking about him in his third year and how he has evolved. It's one of the better interior rushers in the league. Those guys that check those boxes, that usually carries a long, long way. Let's get to linebacker here. Only 4 players because, as I mentioned, the way that these guys are grouped and categorized, a bunch of edge rushers got thrown in at LB, but 4 guys: Darius Leonard, Denzel Perryman from the AFC, Micah Parsons, and Bobby Wagner from the NFC. And I think when you look at this group of players, right, it was clearly with Darius Leonard, Micah Parsons, Wagner, you're looking at guys that have that ability to be true 3-down presences for their defense. The difference, I think, is how they're used on defense, right? Like I think when you look at Parsons, he's got some alien qualities in terms of his ability to really move forward and backward defensively, both as a pass rusher and as a coverage player. Bobby Wagner, he's done a little bit of both over the course of his career. How often have we seen him play as that hook curl player in their cover 3 zone and pick off guys, the number 3 receivers running across the field? But then as his career has gone on, he's become a better and better blitzer as well. So that ability to impact third down doesn't necessarily need to be as a blitzer. It doesn't necessarily need to be as a coverage stopper, but that ability to do a little bit of both, right? Fred Warner from the 49ers, he's not on this list, but we say that all the time with Fred Warner. That's what makes him one of the best linebackers in the NFL, is that ability to impact third down in a unique way for that defense.
Yeah, and I think with this group as well, I mean, Micah Parsons is kind of a freak, so it's tough to put him into this narrative, but I think tackling ability and being a tone setting, buck stops here once you get to me type of linebacker is more important than speed. And I think when we look at our own guy and TJ Edwards, being a really good linebacker here with a straight line 4.87, it's not what it's all about. And Darius Leonard, Bobby Wagner, Denzel Perryman, I think they're all in that kind of 4.6 range. They can run. But these are buck stops here type of linebackers. They finish ball carriers. They are reliable tacklers first and foremost. That's your job as a linebacker. Finish the ball carrier. Don't let him fall forward, bend him back, and be that tone-setting presence in the middle. I know Micah is obviously very, very gifted in a lot of areas, but Leonard, Wagner, Perryman, that's kind of what I view those guys as.
Yeah, and I gave my thoughts on the linebacker position in general earlier with Brandon for Scout Story, so I don't need to dive too much deeper into that position. Let's get to corner. Personally, one of my favorite positions to study, and a bunch of really interesting names here. J.C. Jackson from the Patriots, Xavier Howard from the Miami Dolphins, Denzel Ward, Kenny Moore, Trayvon Diggs, Jalen Ramsey, Darius Slay, and Marshawn Lattimore. 8 corners here, Ben. Thoughts here? I mean, number one thing that stands out, I will say, just looking at this group, ball skills, skills. Trayvon Diggs, Jalen Ramsey, Xavier Howard, Denzel Ward, Darius Slay, Kenny Moore. Like, these guys play the ball, find the ball, and track it and make a play on it in the air, down the field, all 3 levels. That is one thing that definitely stands out from this group.
Yeah, I'm really happy to see Kenny Moore on here because he's been one of the top slot nickel defenders in the league for several years that probably isn't getting the attention and buzz he deserved. Great to see him on this list. But the rest of these guys, Fran, as much as you say ball skills, contact balance is not talked about nearly enough with cornerbacks. And there's a lot of guys with ball skills out there. I put any corner out there, it's going to catch balls out of the jug machine and catch punts. And these guys are all freak athletes. But contact balance while having ball skills is the combination of the traits. Because you're jostling and bumping with receivers in a reactionary position. And these receivers are big and they're gazelles and they're physical too. And you don't get a whole lot of leeway with, contact at the catch point to help yourself with leverage. You have to be able to be that low post rebounder while also being quick footed and find the ball. And I think in order to have the ball skills and to produce, you have to be really balanced and have lower body strength and be competitively tough. And to say, you know what? Yeah, that receiver pushed me off. You don't get to just throw your hands up. You got to keep playing. You got to fight through the contact and stay balanced at the catch point to make plays. Balance and playing through contact for corners, not nearly talked about as enough.
And I think that the competitiveness aspect of that is one of the other standout traits. I mean, all these guys, and we talk about it when it comes to have a short memory, play for the next play, all that. But to me, the competitive toughness aspect of playing this position, so important. And when you look at all of these guys, they show it in different ways, but all of these guys are competitive monsters, right? And so
it's also easy, Fran, when you're 6'2" Trayvon Diggs and 200-pound Jalen Ramsey and 200-pound Marshawn Lattimore.
Yeah, but like Kenny Moore, he's not the biggest guy. Denzel Ward will come down and smack you. I remember that big hit he had against Maryland when he was coming out of Ohio State. Like some of these guys, they'll come down and thump you, man. And I feel like that's a trait that's shared amongst a lot of these corners. And like I said, it's not just about a big hit in the flat. It's the competitiveness to be able to play through contact from snap to whistle. I think that stands out. And then also that contact balance we talked about, I think that's a part of a guy's ability to recover. And I've equated offensive line play to defensive back play so often over the years on this show. And I do think that is a shared quality of those two positions, is that ability, because you're going to get beat. Like you're playing corner, you're playing tackle, like edge rushers and receivers are too freaky. You're going to get beat on plays. And so how you recover, whether that means fighting through contact or having that foot quickness and speed to be able to recover, pivotal. And all these guys have that ability to recover. And you get into instincts and route recognition. Like how many, you and I have watched a lot of Dallas Cowboys film this year. Trayvon Diggs, he's made a bunch of picks. He had his 11th pick this Sunday night against Washington, which is insane. He's made as many plays where the ball wasn't thrown his way or was tipped before it got to him that were like just as impressive. Like his route recognition skills, freak show stuff, like just out of this world. His ability to read routes and shadow receivers, stay in their hip pocket, ridiculous. So no shock that he's at the top of that list for cornerbacks. Let's round this out with safeties. 6 names here. Differing skill sets, and I think this is an interesting discussion. Kevin Byard, Derwin James, Tyron Matthew for the AFC, Quandre Diggs, Budda Baker, and Harrison Smith for the NFC. What stands out? I mean, it's kind of an interesting, kind of smattering of skill sets there.
Yeah, these guys can all run. They can all hit. They're all decent run pass defenders. They can all play high-low. But one thing I know, and there's 6 of them, and I can say confidently about 4, maybe even 5 of them. I know for a fact this group, or most of those guys, they're film junkies. They are huge studiers of the game and students of the game. And I think being safeties are now the new quarterback of the defense. And you're seeing that, whether it's Derwin James wearing the green dot and calling the defense, for Brandon Staley. And there's a lot of guys doing that now. It's a sub-package league, but it's really a top-down type of league. And these guys have to be the quarterbacks of the defense, and that's understanding the tendencies of your opponent and understanding tells and formational tips and what teams like to run and different identifications to help you guys figure out what you're being attacked with. All of these guys, incredibly smart players, film watchers, and students of the game. And I think you have to be at safety. You can't just rely on pure athleticism, pure size, pure speed. And that happens all over the place. There are a lot of guys we study coming out of Saturdays say, this guy has the size, this guy has the speed, this guy's going to jump out the building. If you can't anticipate action and you can't get yourself ahead mentally, you can never tap into the physical side of it. So I think first and foremost, these guys are very smart players.
The other thing too, just looking at this list, outside of Quandre Diggs, and he has to play in the post because of the guy that's next to him, obviously, in Adams. But I think when you look at the rest of these guys, they're all interchangeable, right? Yeah. I mean, Byard, James, Matthew, Baker, Harrison Smith, you want to play him up, you want to play him down, you want to play him in the slot, you want to line him up against the tight end, you want to do whatever you want to do. These guys all do it. And so I think that interchangeable skill set, especially in this league, as you're starting to see more of these 2 high defenses, and we talked about that and that impact. When you have more of these 2 high schemes, you need those guys to be able to do a little bit of both, especially if you're going to disguise and do you can't just be one player. It's great. Hey, if you're just a post player, there are teams that are going to find that home for you. There are still single high teams in the NFL. There are some really good defenses. There are 1 high defenses in the league, but I think that interchangeable skill set is also a very valuable trait.
All right, 6 guys here, Fran, putting you on the spot, considering everything and who these guys are today, their ages and everything.
Okay.
All right, your son's 3 years old. He's got a good football team. Which one of these 6 safeties are you putting on your son's football team? Who are you taking?
Just film. Don't worry about health. Don't worry about anything. I would go I think I would be hard-pressed to not go Derwin James and Tyron Matthew. right? If we're just going off these 6. Now, I think the way I would look at this would be both guys. I mean, Derwin James is just such a freak show whenever he's healthy and he's out there. And Tyron Matthew, the film study aspect of it, of how often he's around the football, the competitive maniac that he is, and the way that he attacks the ball in every phase. I would be hard pressed to find a better pairing than that group.
Yeah, you're not going to get much of an argument from me. I think Tyron Matthew is actually a cornerback playing safety.
Yeah.
And I think he has the coverage matchup ability, the ball skills in a very feisty, tenacious package that allows him to be a safety, middle of the field guy as well. But he's essentially a corner, a nickel, a safety, back end player, blitzer. I take Tyron and Derwin James all day.
We'll probably do at some point once the Eagles season ends in a few weeks, couple of months. We'll look at the all-pro team of the teams the Eagles have faced. Who are the guys that stood out most to us on film this year? We'll kind of put that together. That'll be a lot of fun. Similar discussion to this one. But Ben, this was fun. Just kind of chew on this. Looking at the Pro Bowl roster again. You and I both are in the same boat. I can't stand all the discourse around the Pro Bowl, but it's just fun to be able to kind of look at this and what are some of our big takeaways here looking at this roster.
Yeah, absolutely. Really fun. I'm not sure how these Pro Bowls get picked anymore. I think it's partially fans, partially peers, partially mail-in ballots from the astronauts out there at the space station. I'm not sure how they get compiled. It shows up on my desk. I look at it and move on with my life, but really fun exercise.
When the clock hits all zeros, the game might be over, but the action is not. Join us for the post-game show presented by Rico for instant reaction. Watch live as Coach Nick Sirianni and Eagles players come to the podium and meet with the media. We will make sure you do not miss a word. Myself, Ike Reese, and Gabriella DiGiovanni will also break down the game live at the desk and hear from Eagles insider Dave Spadaro to get his thoughts. The post-game show presented by Rico can be seen on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, and the team's social media channels.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Fun discussion there with Ben. Good stuff. We'll be talking to him later this week as well. Let's now get into a mock draft we got from our Draft Mailbag. And this week, we're going to go to TSB22, who left a 5-star review saying, "Hey, guys, love the show and the insight y'all bring. I have a Cowboys mock draft. Hope that's allowed for everybody to review. Use the Rise and Draft mock draft simulator." Great stuff from TSB22. So, a Dallas Cowboys mock draft. And to me, real quick, what I'll do, and if you send this for any team in the NFL, I will try my best to do a little bit of research and try and give you the best advice I can give you. I think when you look at the Dallas Cowboys, and it's interesting because this is a team, the leadership has been in place there for a while, right? It's a relatively new coaching staff, certainly a new defensive coordinator in Dan Quinn, but they've got certain types. I think when you look at not just, obviously, Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, those guys have been there for a while, but Will Mccree, who was the VP of player personnel, he's been in charge now since the 2014 NFL draft, right? So, I mean, we have a nice sample size of players and themes and trends with the way that they target players. And, certainly name brand schools is one. It seems to be a Will Mccree preference. They trend heavily towards Power 5 competition. They don't necessarily need to target plus athletes. They'll obviously, look, you got a great one in Micah Parsons this past year, but that's not going to be a necessity for these guys overall. And then when you get to day one, day two, they really target guys that have a toughness profile, right? That's something that has really stood out over the course of Will McClay's time there in Dallas. They're not afraid to buck traditional position value. They took Zeke Elliott high. They've taken guards in the top 15. They took a linebacker in the top 15 this year, right? So not afraid to go against positional value early. And they like being first on a position. I remember Jeff Kavanaugh coming on the show last spring and saying that was a trend that popped up time and time again. They like taking the best linebacker in the draft. And really, maybe that goes hand in hand with the positional value thing. Hey, there's something to be said for getting the best player in the draft at a certain position. I think that's an interesting kind of takeaway. So with that said, let's get into your first couple picks here. And we get Auburn cornerback Roger Mccree, first round, 26th overall. I think that checks some boxes here, right? You have obviously a name brand school. The toughness aspect definitely matches up. Roger Mccree, one of the more talented corners and one of the more competitive corners in this class. I think that definitely stands out. And athleticism, not necessarily like his calling card, right? He's not just known as like this big time athlete, and that's what makes him good. And so I think that profile definitely stands there with Roger Mccree. I think that fits. I think he fits the defensive scheme. He's got some coverage versatility. So I really like that pick. Let's go to day two here. Jackson Kirkland, Kirkland, the offensive lineman from Washington, and James Cook, the running back from Georgia. And obviously 2 big schools, right? So that fits. I think Jackson Kirkland definitely has that fit of that Washington or of that Dallas offensive line. He's a bigger body and probably more of a guard than a tackle. So he can definitely chip in, especially on that left side for the Dallas Cowboys. I think that definitely fits. The toughness aspect is not a question with Jackson Kirkland. So I think that matches up. And then you look at James Cook. I think he checks a lot of these boxes as well, and he brings a juice factor that offense will always be looking for. You look at Tony Pollard, and they got him in the 3rd or 4th round coming out of Memphis. One of the rare times they've gone into the group of 5 for a player. I think when you look at James Cook, I think he presents some of those similar qualities that they look for in the backfield. So good start there to this draft. Then we'll just round this out. Day 3, you've got Arkansas defensive tackle John Ridgway, Jerry Jones, an Arkansas alum. Remember that? So that there's certainly a little bit of connection there. Boston College wide receiver Zay Flowers, TCU corner Travius Hodges Tomlinson. We haven't talked about him too much here this year, but a really good corner. And then Jaleel Billingsley, the tight end from Alabama. So John Ridgway, I think he definitely fits. When you look at the way that they play up front, he's definitely more of that nose tackle type, but I think that he's got that ability to line up and down the line of scrimmage. His body type and his quickness off the ball, I think, allow you to use him in a number of different techniques. Zay Flowers, he's actually going back to school, so don't need to dive too deep into him. He won't be in this upcoming NFL draft. Travius Hodges Tomlinson, he's a corner I think definitely fits too. Kind of like Mccree, where he's got that competitive toughness aspect, doing what he did down at TCU over the last couple of years. I really liked him, especially when I studied him over the summer. And then Jaleel Billingsley, he's got that ability to be a combo tight end moving forward to the NFL. And so I think that would be a good fit there for the Dallas Cowboys. So TSB 22, good stuff. I think you really hit the nail on the head. A number of really good fits there from a profile standpoint with the Dallas Cowboys. Again, if you guys ever have a mock draft you want to send in, it doesn't matter if you're an Eagles fan or a fan of any team in the NFL. Send it our way. We will break it down. If you've got rankings on a position you want us to break down, if you've got questions about a specific prospect, head on over to Apple Podcasts. Leave the question in the comment box. We will get to it here in an upcoming episode. Thanks for joining us once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Hope you enjoyed this early week edition. We'll be back later this week. Look, the bowl games, it's been a little bit dicey, right? We've had games canceled left and right, but it looks like these college football playoff games will be going off as scheduled. So we'll be breaking them down later this week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast presented by Life Brand. Hey, Eagles fans, get ready for the game each Sunday with an exclusive look at Eagles pregame warm-ups brought to you live each week when you join myself, Amy Campbell, and Eagles insider Dave Spadaro on the Kickoff Show presented by Exalta. We provide Eagles-focused analysis, late-breaking news, and the team perspective that you cannot get anywhere else. The Kickoff Show presented by Exalta can be seen live 50 minutes before kickoff on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles mobile app, and the team's social media channels.